So you might have noticed that this retreat this weekend was entitled In Search of a Quiet Mind. So it was sort of cleverly entitled. We didn't guarantee that you'd find a quiet mind, only that you would search for a quiet mind. So the truth is there's no such thing as a quiet mind. That's the truth of it. You know, the nature of the mind is to think. That's what it does, right? Think, conceive, conceptualize, plan, regret, hope, dream. Right? Isn't that what it does? So we can, at some point in our spirituality, we can come across the idea that it's spiritually beneficial to have a quiet mind. Right? So there's another thought that fights with all the previous thoughts. And somehow we expect out of that there'll be a quiet mind. Right? Isn't that what we do? Isn't that what we were taught? Just meditate, it'll work out. Anybody been doing that for like a couple of decades or so? And, I know it's out there somewhere, this quiet mind. I know it. But so part of this whole journey is just being honest with ourselves, Like it's saying, okay, I've tried that, right? When I sit down to meditate, I try to be silent. And if I can't be silent, at least I'll think spiritual thoughts. And then the mind, one of the things that we discover really early on in meditation is the mind's going to do what the mind's going to do. Right? Is that not true? And there are techniques, it is true, there are techniques that we can sort of, force the mind into submission for limited periods of time. There's basically two problems with that. One is that when you get up for meditation and you go out in the world and your attention is elsewhere rather than trying to force your mind into submission, all of the usual annoying mind activities just come back into play. Often with more force than they did before, because you were forcing your mind into silence, and then when you let go of the leash, it's going to run around for a while. So what is the answer to that? Is it, well, I'll just try harder? That's typically what's recommended, right? Just try. You're not trying hard enough, or maybe you're just not cut out for it. That was my conclusion, by the way. But I'd suggest one of the real useful things about meditation is you can find out really quickly, unless you're looking for something else, you can find out really quickly that you're not actually in control of what is running through your head. Right? If you could control it, if you just had control over everything that was happening in your head, you could just tell it, hey, I'm meditating right now, come back in 30 minutes, I'll be there. Anybody do that? I'm waiting for someday somebody to say, yeah, I can do that. Okay. But it comes at the expense of effort. Like, how much effort is required to sort of, submit the mind to our will, to our personal will. And is that really the objective? We're given this mind. The mind's good at thinking, and we're not in any way implying that thinking in totality is bad, right? It's obviously really useful in some arenas. It's just that in the arena that we're talking about, it's not. And the reason that we can say that is actually pretty simple. It's because the mind thinks in words and phrases and sentences, right? I mean, do your minds do that? Like when we're paying attention to what's happening in the mind, there's a thought and then another thought and another thought. And then, we get pulled off in a direction and we come back 20 minutes later and wonder how we got there and try to track our way back and realize how stream of consciousness that process really is. So we can get carried away by our thinking because it's so fascinating, right? Sort of more fascinating than, just this, right? So we get tugged away by it, intrigued by it. It's almost like a lot of times around little babies, the aunts or grandparents or come in with a little flashy toy and, oh, look at this, look at this. That's sort of what our thoughts do too. How about this toy? Is that interesting? Okay, how about this one? And they finally find the right one and you're off, for next half hour. So, that, I don't know about you, but that was my experience with meditation. You try to sit down and, have spiritual experiences, peace, joy, bliss, happiness, and, and occasionally that might happen, but often it was just this annoying sort of continuum of thoughts. Thoughts, once you started paying attention to it a bit, you realized how repetitive it was, how many times you thought the same thought, like in your lifetime, how many times you told yourself the same story, with maybe a slightly improved outcome each time, but, just over and over and over again. I once did this weekend retreat. It went on for 3 days. You slept there, ate there, started at 7 o'clock in the morning, finished at 10 o'clock at night. And the entire retreat was 2 people sitting across from each other, and one person would say, tell me who you are. And you'd tell your story, and for 10 minutes, and then you'd switch roles, and then you'd switch partners for 3 straight days. And so there were, besides being sort of mind-boggling, repetitious and boring, one of the things that you realize, 2 things. One is everybody's story wasn't all that much different. The names are changed in the storyline, but basically, everybody has a storyline. And the other thing is you got really, really tired of telling your own storyline. You just realized, how sort of, I don't know, it didn't really have anything to do with, just being in that moment, but there was this compulsion to just keep talking about the past and, what I did, what I believe, what I think, what my opinions are. And at some point, it got to the point where I couldn't quite believe even what I was saying, but I was on a roll, so I did it for 2 more days. But that's sort of what we find out really early on in any kind of meditation practice, or it doesn't even have to be a formal sit-down thing, but just when we spend some quiet time for ourselves to really see, I'm just going to check out what's going on in here, and there's practical thinking, right? Thinking about our careers, thinking about, things that we need to do, and that takes a certain amount of time. But there's, when we really look at it, there's an awful amount of time and energy spent on sort of repetitious things. There's, in Buddhism, they talk about the 4 pairs of mundane concerns, right? And so one pair is gain and loss. There's pleasure and pain. There's fame and infamy. There's praise and blame. So four pairs of mundane concerns. So we can sort of check in and see how much of our psychic energy we spent, over a course of a lifetime on mundane concerns. But when we look at all of those things, those are all sort of in defense of me, the sense of me, this sense of self. So as long as we're concerned about ourselves, primarily, we can do altruistic things and all of that, but, we might as well use that energy constructively. Like, as long as I'm going to spend a lot of time and energy sort of trying to manage my life, to manage my situations and experiences, to sort of, gain, pleasurable experiences for myself, trying to avoid the pitfalls as much as I can. As long as we're going to do that, we might as well do it with, the highest possible interest and stake. As long as we're interested in ourselves, why not get to the root of it? Why not find out, well, in amongst all of this seeking of pleasure and avoiding pain, gain and loss, etc., who is it that's doing that? Right? Before I try to fill the sense of, being me leading this life, wouldn't it make sense to find out, well, wait a minute, who exactly is this that's leading this life? Who is it that I'm trying to create all these experiences for? Doesn't that make sense? But we tend not to ask that question. We tend to ask, well, I'm sure there's, I've had good experiences, no doubt, but I'm sure there's more better ones out there. Or we get into spirituality and then we think, well, surely, all I've heard about spiritual experiences is that'll be ultimately fulfilling somehow. That's the hope, isn't it? Right? If we're spending a lot of time and energy going down this road, is that there's a payoff there. Payoff for whom? And we can begin to catch on that it's still the same game. It's still like, well, what can I do that will benefit me? But now it's in a spiritual context, right? I've given up my old materialistic identity, when I used to believe that, a newer used car would really do it for me. But now I'm on a search for spiritual enlightenment. But can you see it's still the same game? It's still a denial of what's present. Is it not? What's here, as is, here in this body-mind, is it somehow lacking something? So what I'm going to do is go look for it. And where do we look? We look outside of ourselves. Always the next experience, the next rewarding anything. I mean, it can be, dinner with friends. It can be a career move. It can be anything, drugs, alcohol, anything. Just to outside of myself. That's where I'm going to look. And then we get into spirituality or psychology even, and we think, oh, okay, the answer's here in my mind. That's really looking within. I'll look in my mind. And what we can find out is that there's as much confusing stuff happening there as out in the world. As much drama playing out here as there is out there. And we can, fight the good fight and think, well, what I have to do is sort of get my act together, clean up my karma, just have the right set of beliefs, the right thoughts. In other words, improve my existence to the point that I would be qualified for some kind of eternal bliss. Sounds reasonable, right? It's what we do in the rest of life. Work hard, stay focused, have a goal, and work our way towards that goal and achieve that goal, and you're there. But in spirituality, a lot of things are upside down and backwards. What works in normal everyday life doesn't really work in this territory that we're talking about. And it comes back to this sense of denial of what's already here. If we assume that somehow we lack something, lack some knowledge, lack the right ideas, lack the right situation, then we can conclude that the solution, therefore, is to fix all those things, and then I'll be qualified. That's sort of the prerequisites. But what if that wasn't true? Like, at all? So what we're talking about actually, surprisingly, has nothing to do with fixing anything. Growing up and becoming an adult, sure. There's rewards there. There's rewards in life. Better job, more security, nicer partner. There's payoffs in life for sort of growing up into adulthood. But what we're talking about here isn't actually growing up at all. It's not attaining anything that's not already present. That's the really surprising thing about it. If our conclusion, it couldn't possibly be present now in this body with these thoughts, isn't that the assumption? We conclude that, we don't know, obviously, but we conclude that I know that what I have to do to recognize what I truly am is to sort of fix this stuff first. So what if it wasn't like a merit-based system at all? What would that do to your spiritual search? So I'd suggest what holds that whole idea of spiritual search in place is the denial with no evidence of what we are. It's just an assumption. It's like, no, that can't possibly be true. It can't possibly be true that, what I hope to find, after 20, 30, 40 years of meditation is what I am now. I don't care if, sort of enlightened guys from the past told me that. I just discovered a quote in the last month that from a source that I wouldn't have expected. And the quote, I'll give you the quote first and then tell you who said it. I'm not going to get this quite right, but it's the one who is seeking is what is sought. Right? Just a sense of seeking, trying to get at the heart of things, trying to understand this life, trying to understand what birth, life, and death is all about. That movement, that sort of heartfelt caring to, just to really discover for ourselves, what the truth really is. We find out ultimately that movement is, we think it's our own will, our own desire, but I would suggest where that movement comes from is from Source itself. It's already there, it's already moving. What is seeking is what is sought. Okay. Saint Francis of Assisi. I don't know about you, I was surprised by that. So we seek and seek and seek, and when it's realized what it is that's actually there, we recognize that it was there all along. So it's not actually an attainment at all. Unless one is totally deluded, it's not seen as anything special. It's just seen as what everybody is already. Some people know that, some people don't. It's the only difference. But to deny its presence now is to deny that, I don't know. In my opinion, it's miraculous enough that there's one creation, right? But we somehow insist that, no, there's got to be at least one more. There's creation, yeah, all of that, that's cool. But then there's me sort of outside of that. Somehow I've got to earn my way into the unity of creation. I mean, how would you do that? You're not cider. You're not part of creation. Well, anybody come up with an achievement so compelling that you'd earn your way into creation? But that's the assumption. I feel separate. you know. And there's something out there that there's, in my 20s, there was a sense of almost like living in a bubble, you know. It was like I was here and then life was happening out there, and there was a disconnect. Like I wasn't quite part of it. I didn't know quite how to get traction there, how to feel like I was really engaged in life. And of course I looked outward first, you know, like, well, maybe what is needed is just more exciting experiences, you know, more dramatic things, more, you know, just more and more and more. Maybe one day there'll be, you know, the ultimate experience, after which you live happily ever after. But that idea of a permanent experience that will so totally transform us, that we'll be forever satisfied, one of the things you can notice is that that kind of experience has never happened in the past. It's always our hope for the future. Like I've had really cool experiences, really rewarding, gratifying, enjoyable. But if someone was to ask me, is that sufficient? I mean, would you be willing to just cease tomorrow? You know, has everything been accomplished, satisfied? Is that enough? And the common answer is, well, no, but I know that if I meditate some more and get enlightened, then that'll solve everything. But one of the misconceptions about enlightenment is that it is an experience. The recognition can happen concurrently with, you know, a set of experiences, just like every other day there's always experiences happening. I mean, it can be much more profound, much more pleasurable, blissful, cosmic, whatever. And one of the mistakes that can be made, and is often made, is that we mistake the experience for the recognition of what we are. Whatever the experience is. You know, we believe that if the experience is so compelling, it'll forever propel us into a state of bliss and will never come down. Sort of every druggie's dream, right? I'll get so high that I'll just never come down again. But it's actually not that at all. It's, I mean, just like we did this morning in the guided meditation, it is the recognition of that awareness within which everything happens. It may not sound as exciting as mind-blowing bliss for eternity, right? But it's actually the way it is, right? And it's already happening now for everybody. It's within that awareness that your entire experience happens. I mean, is it not? Your body, as a sensing organism, is what experiences the entire world. You know, we project it out there in 3D, but what actually experiences it is entirely within your body. I mean, this isn't philosophy, right? This is our direct experience when we stop to think about it. We presume that we're separate and life's out there in this 3D world, and I'm just this, you know, little person trying to get by. But the reality of it is that the entire world, the entire experience of whatever we experience, happens within this organism and that organism, everyone, already. But we tend to ignore that, like, well, okay, that awareness, that I've sort of taken for granted all my life, has that capacity to contain everything. You could almost say welcome everything, not judge anything, not try to distance itself from any experience, good or bad, right? Good or bad, you're still aware of the experience. It'd be much better marketing if I could promise eternal bliss and joy and happiness. But the truth is that recognition of what we essentially are as being this awareness within which life happens, all of it, all the comings and goings, that's actually the freedom of it. If we're identified with the body, with our mind, with our storyline, with our concepts, those are subject to change, all of it. All right. So that's when the Buddhists talk about impermanence. Is that a surprise to anyone? That life as it shows up is impermanent, always changing. Tomorrow's always different than today. This body next year will be different than today. Thoughts will change, beliefs will change, health. All of that's subject to change, right? So even this experience that is coincident with spiritual enlightenment is also an experience equally subject to impermanence. No such thing as an enlightenment experience. There might be an experience when you recognized what you truly are. Those could both happen at the same time. But the experience will go. No matter what it is, how incredibly blissful, how much you're certain that it will never be other than that. Because there is that sense of it, like, oh, I see it now, I'll always see it and it'll always look like this. And then when it fades, the common mistake is to try to get that particular experience back again. But all experiences are impermanent. There's not the ultimate experience. There is that within which all experiences happen. So what does this have to do with a quiet mind? So what we said at the outset, if we're trying to quiet the mind, we're actually adding to the energy of the mind. That opposition energizes it. It's just like, sort of fighting with your teenage son. The more you oppose it, the more they go this other way. So if we really stop and look and see what's happening when we sit down and sort of, follow that, 2,500-year-old guidance, look within, know thyself. So we look within and we think we're looking within when we're looking at all this activity in the mind. And we can be sort of shocked by that when we first look at it. Shocked both by the content and the sort of squirrely nature of it, that we can't quite keep it, doing what we want it to do. But that's actually helpful information when we're willing to admit that to ourselves. The difficulty is when we keep going down the same road over and over again and hitting our heads against the wall by trying to control it. We try to control it. We not only energize it, we give it credibility. Again, I'm not talking about useful thinking. I'm talking about all that repetitive, petty, judgmental, opinionated kind of thinking. All that thinking that comes out of memory, sort of bringing that up, all the identification with everything that's gone before, or hope and fear about what might come in the future. If it's a practical plan, great. But it's, the worry, the anxiety, the self protective storyline that we take. All of that, we can see that it energizes the mind and reinforces our belief that it's actually true, right? But if we believe that what the mind tells us is ultimately true, then you got to take the whole package, right? By that I mean if it's telling us that we're a wonderful person, we're reliable, we're trustworthy, we're good looking, we're whatever. But that's fine, I guess. But then it comes in sometime and tells us that we're unworthy, that we're mean, we're judgmental, that we're callous. So if we believe the mind, are we just believing this side or this side? But if we believe in the sort of ultimate judge and jury nature of the mind, then you got to take the whole package. Whatever comes up, you own. That would be ugly, huh? Imagine if they come up with some new technological device where that everybody has to wear, that when you walk down the street, every thought that runs through your mind is sort of broadcast in a bubble up above your head of what is going through your head. I don't know, maybe it would have a great equalizing effect, I don't know. But, I think all of us, when we really stop and pay attention to what's going on in there, realize that there's a lot of just, who knows where it comes from, right? But if we take credit for it, we got to take the blame for it too. It goes as a package. But if we can really see what's going on, is that, actually, when I really look at it, I don't actually know where the thoughts come from. And I don't actually know where they drop away into. All I know is that's what's happening, right? They arise into consciousness, or maybe drop down into consciousness, don't know. But they're there for a while. They have a certain lifespan, arising, hang around for a while, drop away. Sort of the mind sort of running on momentum. Like we know it has usefulnesses, so, but when there's nothing really to think about that's useful, it'll think about anything else over and over again. So that's the territory that we're talking about. So again, trying to quiet that, trying to quell it, beat it into submission. Everybody tries to do that. But the sooner that you can see that it is a futile effort, faster you'll get through that. But you have to sort of really see that, and admit to ourselves, well, actually, I am not capable of controlling my thoughts. I mean, I can if I'm focused and I'm working and I've got, something happening on the computer. I can do that. But I'm talking about the rest of the time when our mind is just spinning on empty. But by admitting that, then we're also free of that. If we admit that, well, actually, I can't even say for certain that whether they're even my thoughts or not. I mean, we can sort of assign this area like the subconscious that, well, that's where they originate from, and they sort of percolate up every once in a while. Yeah, maybe. But then, the same question, well, then are we responsible for those thoughts that get buried in my subconscious? It's the same question. Just because we assigned it a different folder doesn't mean that it's any different. So it's good to sort of be honest with ourselves. Well, actually, in my own direct experience, that is something that I recognize that I don't actually have control over. That actually frees us up that thoughts may be there. But if we're not responsible for their content, that takes a huge weight off us because we're not trying to manage that. The idea of managing the thoughts is just another thought, just another brain-based activity. The other way we can look at thought is to see that all thought is conceptual. Right? When we really notice what's happening in our head, there's this sequence that we run the words through in our mind, and then the next thought, and then the next thought. Now that's actually something that we learned in this lifetime. Right? All the words we learned in this lifetime. So when those thoughts run through our heads, that sequence of words, those are all something that wasn't present at birth, wasn't present maybe for a year or two, and then we learned all these words that were concepts about existence that we then strung together and developed ideas about ourselves, the world, opinions, but all based on words, right? So the question is any word the actuality of anything? All words are concepts about something that, the word chair, I mean, there it is, right there. The word chair, there's lots of chairs. I mean, that's a particular one. I mean, that one has gray legs, that one has white legs. Which one is the chair? It's a concept that we apply to things, or feelings or thoughts or ideas about life. It's never actually life itself. So that any thought, we can see any thought is already one step at least removed from reality. So we can really look at what's happening in our heads this way. One is that there's sort of a stream of thinking that we don't really have control over. And the other aspect of it is that it is an attempt by this organism to sort of understand what's happening out in the world or within this body. But it's not the world itself. It's I sort of imagine it like the play-by-play sports broadcasters, the action's on the field, and then like a moment later, they tell you what you just saw, right? And explain what really happened. And that's sort of what our mind does. I mean, we can, almost anything. You know, we can walk down the road and suddenly, I don't know, a cardinal flies right in front of us. Say, oh, there's a cardinal. Just a moment later, you know, our mind tells us what we just experienced and gave it a name. As if somehow the name of the bird was somehow more real than the bird itself. But all words are like that. You know, so when we depend on the mind to tell us what, I don't know, life is really about, who we really are, we're not using the right tool. You know, it doesn't matter how clever or sophisticated we are. It doesn't actually even matter how intelligent we are. It does matter how honest we are with ourselves. You know, to really observe what's actually happening. But the mind has been in control for so long that it doesn't give up easily. You know, it doesn't like the idea of something that we may even conceptually call awareness that's out beyond the mind's territory. You know, it's sort of like the mind is sort of a bit of a prison warden that way, you know. Just stay in here, we're good, I've got this. You know, don't trust that outside world out there where you're safe in here. So when we're really willing to look at that, that's the usefulness of the mind actually in meditation. Because meditation is more than just an attempt to be quiet or an attempt to have any particular experience. It's really an opportunity to spend some quiet time with ourselves and see what's going on in there. I mean, that's what it really is. You know, to really see the nature of thought, really see how the mind works. You know, and that's why the idea of fixing this thought or this belief or coming up with a better philosophy isn't really the point, because you're still dealing with the mechanism of the mind. You're still totally mind-based activity. You know, you can be thinking about, you know, levels of heaven or whatever. It's still mind-based activity. What's real is real. What's real is who we are, unavoidably. And we can discover that just by looking past things that aren't really permanent, right? Let's just say we have an opinion about anything, really strongly held opinion. An opinion that's so strong that we identify with it. That's who I am. But then 10 years later, we get a little, I don't know, maturity or different situation, look at things a little differently. And suddenly that opinion doesn't have that kind of staying power anymore. So who are we? I mean, did we pass away because that opinion came and went? Or is who we are sort of jump from opinion to opinion, and that becomes our new identity? But if that's who we believe we are, it's sort of a little bit flimsy, right? That it's subject to, I don't know, let's say your whole identity is being a star athlete, and then you do some irreparable damage to your knee, then who you are. Or you're a big time executive and you retire, suddenly you're not what you thought you were anymore. And people have a hard time with that, to the degree that they really believe that who Who they are is what they do. So just coming back to the mind then, we can see an opportunity when we sit down in anywhere. It doesn't have to be in meditation, doesn't have to be for a particular period of time. It's just sort of whenever we have a couple of minutes maybe, waiting for the water to boil, waiting for the gas to finish up. And we just check in. I wonder, like right now, what that awareness, I wonder if that's there now. That sense of being alive. Not without any other definition. That's the basis for this practice of, asking the question, who am I? Or just, being with the statement, I am. Right? Just 3 letters, 2 little words, I am. Only raises 2 questions, actually. What is I? And what is beingness? But that's sort of the whole game right there. That's the purpose of that instruction, is to really sit with that, not to come up with a conceptual answer, like, oh, I know what I am. I'm consciousness. I heard that. I'm good with it. I'll go with that. It actually doesn't have. It has less than no value, because now there's a belief that is conceptual, that prevents us from seeing what's actually true. So this process, like I said before, is really process of being honest with ourselves, what our direct experience is, not what anybody else says about it. But to really sense into it ourselves, like not what I'm supposed to be feeling, not what I'm supposed to be experiencing, not some imagined goal experience that I've heard will look like this or that. It's really the willingness to be like, okay, I'm going to take responsibility myself to investigate to the extent of my satisfaction what this life is about. I mean, that's really the question. But a big step in the direction is to use the mind usefully, use the mind to see that, see the nature of thought, see the nature of concepts. We may get to the realization that, wait a minute, any belief I have isn't actually true. That's sort of startling when you come across that one. They may be, sure, relatively true, but I'm talking about absolutely, under all circumstances, true. It's not awakening precisely, but it can take you a long way in that direction, where we're no longer looking to the mind for the answer. It's much more efficient. When we're looking around in the mind or ideas or concepts and everything, there's a lot of them out there. And to sort of sort through them all and figure out, well, which one is true? Which ones do I believe? It's actually much more efficient to just see the nature of thought itself. See the nature of thought as not being under my control and being composed entirely of concepts. And really using the mind to see that, however I identify myself, man, woman, good, bad, successful, failure, any way, career, this, that, and any way we define ourselves isn't who we are. Maybe relatively true, right? can all look around, see differences in appearance, age, gender, careers. All of that we can see. And is it possible that this awareness, this consciousness is not only who we are, but it is undifferentiated? It's not my awareness, it's awareness. The one awareness. Again, we're not talking about concepts or philosophy. It's just like, is there something that functions through these bodies, that enlivens these bodies? Is aware of these, my existence. And when we first come across this awareness, it can feel personal, right? I've discovered my awareness. I've said this often about this particular point, but it was said that the Buddha, when he got enlightened, proclaimed, I and all beings have simultaneously awakened. So did that mean that here was some, being that was so magnificent that he could just awaken everybody else? Is that what he meant? Or did he mean that when he could see it in himself, he could see it in everyone? That's that seeing what we are, what we inherently are, what we unavoidably are, all of us already, seeing that is actually the basis for any kind of true compassion, right? Because it all the superficial differences don't touch it. We're not denying the superficial differences, but from the perspective of who we really are, and seeing that the other person is really undifferentiated. It is, after all, one existence, one creation. If we look at the manifestation of it, we see differences. Always, all of us look different. Today looks different than yesterday. But when we can really recognize for ourselves in our own direct experience, again, not as a philosophy, but just in the actuality of our own experience, that what I truly am is this openness, this awareness. If you wanted to be a little more religious, you could call it spirit, as long as you don't sort of make it look like it's embodied somewhere. So from the point of view of this awareness, when we look back on our mind, it doesn't have that same sticky quality to it. We can see that, those thoughts may have been, conditioned at a young age. We took them on, in all innocence. We didn't even know that was happening. It's easy to see. I mean, if we sort of imagined ourselves growing up in a different culture, a different economic situation, a different race, a different religion, different parents, different friends growing up, would you have the same beliefs, opinions that you have today? So all of that's conditioning. All of that is something that we've picked up in this lifetime and taken it to be who we are. So we can just say, yeah, okay, that's what happened. It's not actually necessary to fix that at all. I mean, there may be patterns that aren't particularly functional that, we can work on over a lifetime. But the recognition of what we actually are frees us up to do that in a much more objective way. Because it's no longer who we are. It's sort of the difference between, a doctor doing a surgery on a patient and you doing surgery on yourself, right? It feels different. When we feel like, to really see through that shortcoming of mine or my belief system, I mean, it just feels so much like me, to sort of carve that out of my identity is just, can be painful, right? But if we can see that, well, actually, it's not who you ever were, just some conditioning that you picked up along the way. And it's sort of like the measles, you get it. And we've all, anybody not been conditioned by life, their parents? Like thoroughly conditioned. And it's not even like all conditioning is bad, right? Some conditioning is functional. We like that. We don't really call that conditioning. We call that just my skills. So. But we can see through the idea is really not it's not about self-improvement. It's not about fixing our way towards being eligible for understanding who we are. It's really being willing to look at everything directly. And it's, we can get into that spirituality sort of casually, like, well, maybe I'll just check out that yoga class or at the Y, maybe I'll do a little mantra or mindfulness or something. But when we really get into it, it seems to have a momentum of its own that carries us along, and that's actually a good thing. Because there are many points along the way where if it was up to us, we'd check out. We'd say that, I've had enough, seen enough, I'm just going to go back to my old life. There's a term that I really like. It's called divine discontent. Anybody ever feel that? It's sort of like, it doesn't even have to be like life is terrible or, I'm depressed or anything. It can be more like, yeah, life's pretty good, but, I'm sure there's something that still feels lacking somehow, something that's still missing in some way. And that discontent we can often think of as unfortunate, like, I wish I wasn't, being nagged by that thought, that, pushing me, nudging me. a divine discontent. But when we look at it a different way, it's that without that nudging, would we ever move? You know, if life was all fun and games and sunny day every day and everything was going our way. Imagine that if you could sort of arrange your life so everything always went your way. You could get whatever you wanted, and you were absolutely certain that it was going to work out exactly like you wanted it. Would you do it? I mean, it seems like part of the whole experience of life is that things sometimes go our way, sometimes they don't. And we never know quite which way it's going to go. But I think for most of us, when we look back on our lives, the times that we, let's just say matured most, were not the times when everything was going well. Right? It was the more challenging times. Exactly the times that we avoid at all cost. The most transformative times, the ones where, oh no, I don't want that, you know, which is different than saying, well, I don't want to have to do that again. But there's also a sense of gratitude that, well, you know, as hard as that was, I wouldn't wish it to be different. Anybody have that sense of, you know, looking back on your life and thinking, yeah, that was really hard. But, you know, would I be where I am today? Would I know what I know today? Would I have the perspective that I have today had that not happened? Not that we would choose to do it, right? But we can also be grateful for things that, you know, didn't work out exactly our way. I mean, that's sort of, it's really under the whole category of coming into alignment with life as it is, as it shows up. You know, it's not what we tend to do. What we tend to do is try to manage everything, you know, in our own best interest. Right situation, right? But I mean, you know, we've been around for a few years. It's pretty clear that what we imagined life to be when we were 18 hadn't turned out like that, you know? Maybe a little bit. Maybe this way, maybe that way. But, you know, when we really are willing to be okay with that, you know, however life shows up, you know, then we sort of step back from that manager's role where we're trying to manipulate all circumstances. I'm not saying that it's not helpful to plan things in the future, that's fine. But, you know, we plan things, we do the best we can, and maybe it'll work out that way, maybe some other way. You know, are we okay with that? You know? So this is, I talked earlier about just this being with a sense of I am, just that essential nature, just not to answer it philosophically, but just to sit with that. I wonder what that is, that sense. You know, I am, prior to any nouns or adjectives that we put after that, right? Just this simple sense of being. So that's one really productive meditation, really direct, getting to the heart of the matter. You know, but it takes some time and attention to just be willing to stay with that one simple thing for as long as it takes. Mind doesn't like that. Mind likes complexity. Ideas, philosophies, 10 stages to enlightenment. You know. But that one statement sort of gets right to the heart of it. You know, there's this sense of presence, there's a sense of beingness. You know, I wonder what that really is. It seems to be much more in the vicinity of what's living this life. So that's one really direct approach. You know, another approach is what we were just talking about, and that is allowing everything to be as it is. You know, however it arises, you know, doesn't mean that you don't respond to it, don't do what you need to do, but you're not arguing with it. You're not saying that, well, that shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have said that. You know, we're just taking life at face value and then responding to that. So both of those are quite direct, but they require sort of a full-on commitment to it. Under all circumstances, you know, in this moment, what is that sense of presence, beingness? I'm here, there's a sense of aliveness. What's that? And the idea isn't to come up with an answer. You would think it would be. I mean, that's how we were trained, right? 3rd grade, we were expected to have an answer. You asked a question, you're expecting to have an answer. But this is different. This is, again, beyond the mind. So any answer will be less than what's actually true, just by definition. So all that the greatest teacher in the world can really do is to point in a direction and say, this way can save you some time. That's basically the whole teaching. You know, you're welcome to look all those other ways, but this will save you some time. So I'm feeling like we could use a break right about now, and thank you so much for being here this morning. Lovely to see you.